we're sitting down with Ashley McLaughlin, who is the Media and Communications Officer with the International Organization for Migrants and in South Sudan. Ashley, can you tell me, please, you were in Juba as recently as Thursday. What was it like when you left?
So the fighting in Juba started Thursday night. I ended up leaving Friday afternoon, but Thursday, just driving around town before the fighting started, you could sense the tension. There were a lot more checkpoints around town, a lot more people in military uniforms. But by the time there was a little skirmish Thursday night, a few soldiers were killed. It seemed calm by Friday morning, but by around 5 p.m. on Friday, all-out war started. By then I had left, but pretty much everybody, civilians, aid workers, were in lockdown, couldn't go on the roads. And this lasted until Monday evening, when there was a ceasefire between the government and the opposition.
Okay. As I understand it, I saw a report by an academic from the University of Indiana, and he said that both the vice president and president were in a meeting when one of the skirmishes erupted, and it seems like neither of them really had their pulse on why this violence erupted and who's responsible.
Yeah. So, our organization focuses mostly on the humanitarian response, but I've heard the same things, that no one's even quite clear what the cause of the fighting, the initial cause of the fighting was. On Friday night, when it got really heavy, the president and the first vice president, who was the leader of the opposition, were having a meeting about the skirmish that had happened Thursday night, in which a few soldiers had been killed in direct clashes. We always knew, as part of the peace agreement, which was signed by the parties in August, that when eventually the two parties were once again in the same town, with lots of military on both sides, there was just always this apprehension that something small could easily escalate. Unfortunately, we think this is what happened.
I've had a look at the International Organization for Migrants report that was published on the 13th about the situation in WOW. It sounds like you've had to provide a lot of psychosocial support for people who are distressed, and 12 deaths of close relatives and 11 cases of family separation. Can you just unpack a little bit what sort of counseling and guidance you're giving to those people and how they came to lose their loved ones?
So WOW was a really upsetting incident for everybody. It was very disturbing. In late June, a fighting erupted in the town of WOW, which is one of South Sudan's largest towns. So impact and displacement on this town also sort of overflows into the rest of the country, which is already having major economic and food security problems. From what we know, some of the fighting sounded quite brutal. People had to quickly flee their homes. Some went to a UN peacekeeping base. Some went to churches. Some fled to the bush. So it can only be assumed that people saw some really awful things, may have lost their social structures. We're also providing people, shelter. We're providing them water. There's approximately 80,000 people who have been displaced, and no sign of when they'll be able to go home. And whether or not they go home is all about their personal safety, when they feel it's safe for them to return.
And last I heard, Ugandan forces coming in to provide support in terms of looking after nationals from that country. We know that Germany, Japan, India have all evacuated their civilians, and the United States sending in troops to guard the embassy. Are those red flags? Would your organization be keeping tabs on those kinds of security decisions and what it means for your work?
Yes, it's definitely a concern. One of the biggest challenges of providing humanitarian assistance in South Sudan is access to affected populations, whether it be insecurity, whether it be natural impediments. Because of fighting in Juba, it was very violent over the weekend. From my coworkers who were there, there were firefights outside their house. It was, you spent all day listening to bullets, listening to mortar shells. So it was quite traumatic for everybody involved.
When do you go back? When do you go back to Juba? When do you head back to the country?
So we've maintained a core team in Juba, some of us, like I said, we've relocated non-essential staff, and we're hoping to get in as quickly as possible. The problem is, you know, it's a very unpredictable security situation, and we're hoping we can get back in as quickly as possible. But for the time being, our humanitarian operations are going full stop.